it's Kat, and I'm back because what once was will be again. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about a little bit of history that is at play right now in the Game of Thrones and how it actually impacted our entire world. It was a catalyst for significant change. So we saw Tommen and Marjorie and the Sparrow together, and he raised their hand and said, the church and the state are now one. Most importantly, you saw the guys with the 7-pointed stars were now on their armor. So, and honestly, if you were watching, you saw them mostly standing behind Marjorie. So they went to the side and they were standing behind Marjorie. And there's a very important reason for this, and there's actually historical precedence for what's happening and how Mr. Martin is kind of merging these things together. So let's get down to historical events that changed the world. And that's what Mr. Martin is in the background talking to us about, is about how something has changed the world, the catalyst for change. So the catalyst for change was the rise of the Christian church in just prior to the Middle Ages. As we were coming, the Dark Ages were there, Rome was kind of crashing. There were two particular instances that came to mind, and one of them was like the direct scene of Tommen and Marjorie standing there. I'm going to get to that in a second, but the sign on the armor was the first historical significance that I noticed. So in about 325 AD, Rome had broken into basically three kingdoms. It was the Tetrarchy. Rome as the empire, quote unquote, still existed, but it was ruled by three separate kings. And technically they're supposed to be equal and they're all supposed to be looking out for the good of Rome, but in reality there was power struggles as always. And one of these power struggles happened between Constantine, who was the ruler of Gaul, Spain, and Britain, and Maxentius, who was setting in Rome. The third was Galerius, who was in Byzantine, now modern-day Istanbul, which was at one point Constantinople. So what happened was, they were always plotting against each other, and Constantine caught a plot, or at least he said his wife told him about it, and he told Maxentius's father, politely, that it might be a good thing if he just offed himself, or else he'd have to, prosecute him for acts against the state, and it will keep peace, supposedly. But, Maxentius got the message, and so he started plotting against Constantine, or at least Constantine was pretty damn sure that was what was happening. So Constantine gathered up his army and marched south to Rome. Now at this time, Constantine was only nominally a Christian. He had been greatly influenced by his mother Helena, who is now Saint Helena, in the Greek Orthodox Church, and she was a Christian. So, but he was also a Roman, so he was influenced as well by, higher Roman society, which still had all their gods, and he was okay with it. But, he wasn't really committed. So he marches down to Rome, and he gets to the Tiberias River, and he halts, because Rome has some serious defenses. It has Hadrian's Wall, and there's the Tiberias River. So if he crosses over the Tiberias River, then he will be caught between Rome and the river, and his army will be smashed. So he pauses, and through political expedience, and there's all kinds of stories about where this came out of, but he essentially told all his men to go quickly and paint the sign, the Greek sign for Christ, on their shields and their armor. He said he had a vision. And don't get me wrong, because some of his men, definitely part of his soldiers, were Christian as well, because Christianity was really the religion of the poor at this point. The higher society kept mostly the Roman gods. Christianity is the religion of the poor. And that's what he was playing at, because inside of Rome is packed full of people, and it's a lot of poor people. The percentage of people with wealth or the middle class is pretty small compared to the poor citizenry inside Rome. So he's playing on the fact that if he presents himself as the defender of the faith, that he might actually be able to stir up the people inside the city to actually do his job for him. He wouldn't have to go in there. And that's, but Maxentius was basically caught between a rock and a hard place, Rome and the Tiberias. Essentially, if he did come out and smash Constantine, he was probably going to get slaughtered inside the city because he hadn't been so nice to the Christians. And if he did come out, he was going to get slaughtered anyways, and that's exactly what happened. He came out, he crossed the Tiberias over the one remaining bridge that was left, and it funneled his army right into Constantine's attack. So Constantine took over power in Rome, and eventually he took over power in Byzantine, and he renamed the city Constantinople, the gateway to the east. So that's what happened there, and the church, the Christianity, became an official religion within Rome. So Christianity was on the rise. The second thing historically that really reminded me of Tommen and Marjorie holding hands together was Justinian and Theodora. And Justinian the First was in 527 crowned the emperor of the Roman Empire in Constantinople. Theodora ruled as his co-empress. And what was really interesting about this is because this really didn't happen very often, but she had a lot of power. And her history really mirrors Marjorie's history a little bit. Marjorie's an extremely good actress. I noted that on the other video. She had acted like she liked things that Joffrey liked, including killing this one prostitute in order to get her way. She's acted several different times. You know, she's acted in a certain way with Tommen. She acts throughout. So she's an actress, and it's really, you know, trying to tell us something. So Theodora and Justinian, Theodora was an actress before she married Justinian. And in fact, as was the case for many years, and possibly even considered today, is that actresses were loose women. They basically supported themselves not only on the stage, but through prostitution and or becoming the lover of a high-ranking person. And this is what Theodora did. She ended up going to Syria with a proconsul, and she was there with him for 4 years, which is where she probably learned a lot about governing the state. So she knew a little bit about getting men to do things she wanted, and then the state she garnered while she's there. But then proconsul threw her out, and she ended up going to Egypt, where she met up with the patriarch Timothy IV, who supposedly is the person who converted her. Although, you know, we with cynical minds could imagine she might have been doing something else with him there. But in any event, after 3 years, she ended up in Constantinople, where she became an actress again. And that's where Justinian saw her, and he fell so in love with her, and he wanted to marry her. But there was a law in place that said, you know, that the emperor could not marry some common chick, and definitely not an actress. And his mother was all over him about that, his mother, like Cersei. And, you know, eventually his mother died of supposedly natural causes, and he did end up marrying Theodora. And here's what was really about Theodora. Like, she helped him use the church. So there, you know, Constantinople was having plenty of problems. There was financial issues. They were always struggling because, you know, the empire was so huge, and it took so much money to control it. So she helped him by starting to build churches. So they got involved in the church. They presented themselves as a very pious couple. In fact, you know, they built the Hagia Sophia, one of the largest churches ever, which is now a gigantic mosque in Constantinople, still standing today. And they built a bunch of churches all over the place. And in fact, Theodora used her own money and power to build churches under her own name so that she could have her own power. That was her own power base. So the church was, you know, the thing that controlled the citizenry, because, you know, as Marx once noted, that you can control people with their religion. And but all things weren't all that awesome this whole time. There were two major political factions in the city, and they were always at odds with each other. And most of it was being resolved in the Hippodrome, where they had chariot races and other events. And the two sides would support certain chariot riders, the blues and the greens. And at one point, it came to a head, and there was a gigantic riot in the Hippodrome. Literally 30,000 people are involved. So you can imagine, this is the Dark Ages, but look how big Constantinople was and how many people were involved. And it was totally batshit crazy. And Justinian was like, holy gosh, they're going to come for me and we're going to die. And so he and his ministers prepared to flee. And Theodora said, hey, hold on a second. Why are you fleeing? Because they'll just come after you and they'll kill you anyways. Isn't it better to be here and be the king and die in the purple with a purple shroud than to be out there? And besides, if you leave, you have no opportunity to try to right this thing. And sure enough, they called out the army. They were able to put down the riot. And then there's this great scene where Justinian and Theodora stand on a balcony and talk to the crowd and talk about all the greatness, blah, 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 and they hold up their hands. It is a scene in history, and it was right there in Game of Thrones. That was super awesome. But, so, those are two events that presage the rise of the Christian church, and after that, the church, it rose and rose and rose until about the time of the French and American revolutions. And before that, the church was highly involved in almost every aspect of the state. The time before that, where it started, its decline started, was actually when Henry VIII broke away from the church. It was the first time anybody had ever done it. A ruler and said, "Now I'm the head of the church," and his daughter, Queen Elizabeth, simply solidified that. And that's important for where the Game of Thrones story is going. So there's some history. That was the change. It changed all of Western society. Christianity spread throughout the West. And we'll talk more about Bloody Queen Mary on the next one, because that's the other part that changes the church forever. Talk to you later.